Grace and peace to you in the name of God the Creator, Christ the Redeemer, and the Spirit who sustains us. Amen. During a vigil for Renee Good on Friday, January 9th, Bishop Bob Hirschfeld of the Episcopal Diocese of New Hampshire urged all of the clergy in his diocese to be sure their affairs are in order and their wills are up to date. In an interview with the New Hampshire Public Radio earlier this week, he said that he's been preaching the same message for many years: to live without fear and to know that God's love for us is stronger than fear or death. He recalled Jonathan Daniels, a white seminary student from New Hampshire who was drawn to Alabama in 1965 by the power of Martin Luther King Jr.'s leadership. Daniels was arrested in Haynesville, Alabama, along with several others during a demonstration. When they were released from jail with no advance notice, he stepped between a gunman and Ruby Sales, and he took the shot that was meant for her. Bishop Hirschfeld clarified that we are not all called to be martyrs like Daniels, like Good, or like the Reverend Dr. King. But in his speech at the vigil, he said that we are called, quote, with our bodies to stand between the powers of this world and the most vulnerable. He clarified that for him, this is anything from going to school and standing up to a bully, to speaking up at the school board meeting, to attending a rally, to actions that go far beyond that, such as Jonathan Daniels' actions on that August day in 1965. Daniels was designated a martyr by the Episcopal Church in 1991. The Episcopal Diocese of Alabama and the Episcopal Diocese of the Central Gulf Coast sponsor yearly pilgrimages to Haynesville to commemorate Daniels and all martyrs of the civil rights movement. In John's Gospel, Jesus is no stranger to pilgrimages. Unlike the other three Gospels, in which he doesn't go to Jerusalem until the time has come for his arrest, Jesus is in Jerusalem several times throughout John's Gospel, as required of any observant Jew. The 3 annual pilgrimage festivals had been an important part of the religious identity of observant male Jews since the time of Moses. In Deuteronomy 16, Moses told the Israelites that God commanded 3 times a year, all the heads of your households will gather before God at a place that God will choose, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles. No one may show up empty-handed. Every person must bring a gift in proportion to God's blessings upon you. Our text this morning takes place during the first of 3 Passovers for which Jesus is in Jerusalem. He goes to the temple, where he finds what any observant Jew attending their 2nd or their 20th festival would expect to find: people exchanging Roman money for money that is acceptable to use within the temple grounds. People selling animals and grains for sacrifice to travelers for whom it has been inconvenient, or maybe even impossible, to bring their sacrifices from home. This is all usual and ordinary. So then, what's the problem? I think there may be 2 different but interrelated answers. Here's the first one. Remember, in ancient Near Eastern cultures, temples were thought to be literally the homes of the gods to which they were dedicated. So this temple in Jerusalem was sacred to God, and each person of faith is, at least in theory, welcome to worship in the temple. But when sacrifices are being sold, and when each person must bring a gift in proportion to God's blessings, what happens when someone can't afford the prices that the temple merchants set? Does that send a message that God is no longer the God of the poor and vulnerable? But there's a deeper answer too. When Jesus drives out the merchants, he paraphrases the very end of the book of Zechariah, which foretells that there will no longer be merchants in the temple of God because there will no longer be a need. The worship of God will have outgrown the temple. Is Jesus implying that this day has come? It's significant that the cleansing of the temple takes place during Passover. This festival commemorates the Hebrew escape from Egypt when God commanded them to eat a meal of lamb and unleavened bread and to paint their doorposts with the blood of the lamb so that God would know to pass over their homes as the last plague made its way through the land. It commemorates absolute trust in God to liberate them from oppression. But oppression doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it looks like holding a people in captivity for 500 years or more, and sometimes it looks like controlling access to the pilgrimages and thereby to God by setting the price of the sacrificial offerings. Jesus' actions in the temple remind the disciples of Psalm 69, verse 9. Because I am consumed with zeal for your house, the insults of those who ridicule you fall upon me. Jesus will not stand by and let the merchants insult God's covenant by commodifying acts of faith. Tomorrow is our national commemoration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. We remember him as a civil rights leader and a great public speaker, but we don't always remember that his work for justice in the civic life of America was deeply rooted in his understanding of himself as a follower of Jesus. Reading through his speeches and his writings, it becomes clear that he was, first and foremost, a pastor and a person of faith. In 1957, he visited the new nation of Ghana. On his return to the U.S., he preached in Montgomery, Alabama, on the escape from Egypt. He drew parallels between that text, the nonviolent movement for independence from the British Empire that led to the founding of Ghana, and the nonviolent civil rights movement in the U.S. Dr. King preached that day saying, quote, "The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community. The aftermath of nonviolence is redemption. The aftermath of nonviolence is reconciliation. The aftermath of violence are emptiness and bitterness. This is the thing I'm concerned about. Let us fight passionately and unrelentingly for the goals of justice and peace, but let's be sure that our hands are clean in this struggle. Let us never fight with falsehood and violence and hate and malice, but always fight with love, so that when the day comes that the walls of segregation have completely crumbled in Montgomery, that we will be able to live with people as their brothers and sisters." He went on to talk about the role that the Church of England played in the exploitation of workers throughout the British Empire, then continued, quote, "God comes in the picture even when the church won't take a stand. God has injected a principle in this universe. God has said that all people must respect the dignity and worth of all human personality, and if you don't do that, I will take charge." It seems this morning that I can hear God speaking. I can hear God speaking throughout the universe saying, "Be still and know that I am God." And if you don't stop, if you don't straighten up, if you don't stop exploiting people, I'm going to rise up and break the backbone of your power, and your power will be no more. And the power of Great Britain is no more, because the God of the universe eventually takes a stand. And I say to you this morning, my friends, rise up and know that as you struggle for justice, you do not struggle alone, but God struggles with you. When Jesus cleansed the temple, the authorities intervene, demanding that he show them a sign. He offers them one which not even the disciples could interpret until after his resurrection. But instead of believing or even just trusting that maybe he was saying or doing something worth paying attention to, as the servers at the wedding at Cana had done, they challenge him. You obviously don't have any idea what you're talking about. You can just hear them scoffing. But they miss his point entirely. The religious establishment can't control people's access to Jesus. And because Jesus is the Word made flesh, that means God is no longer confined to the temple. God's presence and God's grace cannot be bought and sold on the marketplace. Not everyone gets that point, even today. We hear that in the Reverend Dr. King's speech when he references Psalm 46. The God of hosts is with us. Our stronghold is the God of Israel. Come and see what God has done. God makes the earth bounteous. God has put an end to war from one end of the earth to the other, breaking bows, splintering spears, and setting chariots on fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted upon the earth. If nations don't stop exploiting people, Reverend Dr. King paraphrased, God would rise up and break the backbone of their power. When the dignity and worth of all people are not respected, God takes notice. When the people in power use violence to control the narrative, God takes notice. But when people struggle for justice, God takes notice. When they blow whistles and bang pots and pans to warn of danger, God takes notice. When people gather in protest, God takes notice. When a young mother hides a DoorDash driver in her home, God takes notice. When people deliver groceries to their neighbors who are scared to leave their homes, God takes notice. When they show up in the face of the violence, when they show they're not afraid of the tear gas and the pepper spray, when they get the word out about the side of the story that we are not meant to hear, God takes notice, and God struggles with them. The story of the Israelites is a story of liberation. The story of Jesus is a story of liberation. In Jesus, we are set free to love and care for our neighbors. And the story of the times in which we are living can be a story of liberation if we are bold, if we are strong, if we are daring. Because we know that Jesus is with us.